Welcome to Your Family Dog, a podcast dedicated to helping families love living with dogs.
Welcome back to the Your Family Dog podcast. This is Tina Spring. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host, Julie Fudge Smith, and have we got a guest for you today. So Helen St. Pierre and I have known each other probably at least 15 years, maybe longer than that, but that's not possible because she's not that old. And today we're going to talk about just a portion of her career, specifically working with special needs and old dog hospice and hospice care. And her organization is a 501c3, and it's called Dogs Go To Helen. And we wanted to bring her on today to talk about this because this is a really amazing, beautiful gift to the world. And we are all about supporting amazing, beautiful gifts to the world. So welcome to the show, Helen. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat about this. It's definitely a labor of love. So when I get to talk about it and, focus on that a little bit, it's a really nice gift for me too.
Well, we're so pleased that you're here. And so Helen, I guess the logical place to start is, how did you get started with older dogs? What drove you to set up All Dogs Go To Helen?
So I started my career in the behavior and training world, in the shelter world, as many of us, did. But 21 years ago, I realized I really, really wanted to work with dogs and animals in general. And I had moved out to Colorado, where the La Plata County Humane Society was the only animal shelter out in the Four Corners area. And this was a very high kill shelter where we had 50 runs, but 40 of them were filled with dogs. And what we would do is every morning we would shift the 10, each row would go over so we could clean them, if that made sense. So we had 40 runs, we had 50 runs, but only 40 dogs could be in them. But we were right next to the reservation, and La Plata County area was filled with a lot of street dogs, stray dogs. And so we would tend to get about 5 or 6 dogs in each day that would come in as strays or reservation dogs or all of this stuff. And if at the time we had 40 dogs in all 40 kennels, we would have to go down the rows and say which dog was the least adoptable. And we would have to on site euthanize 5 or 6 dogs in order to be able to move those dogs that weren't claimed by the end of the day in. We had a crematorium on site. And we had a euthanasia room right next to the crematorium room. And that was my introduction to dogs. I literally hit the ground running. So I was in that arena for about 3 years, and climbed my way up from just dog tech to all the way up to kennel supervisor to being certified in euthanasia and all of that stuff. Because as we know, the shelter world has a lot of sort of high turnover, because it's a very difficult job. And that experience in those first 3 years really shaped my views on behavior and shelter and dogs, the treacherous life that dogs lived if they weren't, the perfect dog to be adopted. And our senior dogs were like the first dogs to go, right? And as a result, I have forever, ever since leaving that shelter world, I have always and will always donated free of charge my evaluations and my shelter work to every shelter and rescue that wants evaluations on dogs or help with dogs. I've never charged any. It's my way of paying back to the amount of animals that I had to say goodbye to in a very short period of time. And because of that, I have always been sort of very active in the shelter world. But when I lost one of my old dogs about 7 years ago, I really missed having the old dog in the house. There's something about having an old dog in your house that sort of balances everything. And right as I lost him, a very old senior dog came into the shelter that I was currently helping and still help. And they said, we really need to find a foster for this dog. And I said, I'll take him. And it was just it was one of those knee-jerk reactions at 11 o'clock at night when it came through on the chat, and I took him in. And his name was Elliot. And we started with Elliot. We rehabbed him. We only had him for about a year, and then he passed. And literally as soon as Elliot left, we jumped in and we took on another one. And we started, so this was about 6.5 years ago, where we started taking in old dogs, one dog at a time, and have them from anywhere from a week to 3 months to a year. And about 2 years ago, we ended up with a dog that had more medical issues than I can state. He had skin, heart, thyroid, I mean, you name it. And his medications are about $600 a week. And I had so many followers on my business page that knew what I was doing, because I obviously talked a lot about senior dogs and senior dog care. And so many people were like, can we please help you? How do we donate to help you? How do we get you down this road? We want to assist. And so I said, okay, I'll start this separate space where people can put funding in, and it can be a charitable organization, but it wasn't a nonprofit. And very quickly, I realized that with the amount of funding and the amount of need that there was, I needed to start a 501c3. And it sort of over the last 2 years has grown and grown and grown. And now we have 16 hospice dogs in a sanctuary. We bought a house specifically for a place to keep these dogs. And the need continues to grow. So it's a very organic journey, started from the very beginning of my career, all the way to this point. But it was sort of like a trickle effect until suddenly the floodgates opened, and now it's, 50% of what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
That's a great story. My question for you at this point is, can you tell us a little bit more about how the sanctuary operates? The dogs are not available for adoption or fostering. They just stay with you at the sanctuary. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of your day-to-day operations? How does this work?
So the sanctuary is our home. Our home is the sanctuary. They're one and the same. Prior to buying this house, our old dogs were in our living room. So we would have 4 or 5 of them at that point, sort of in our living room. And we would be just cleaning up pee and poop all day because that's what it is. And we have young children. So my youngest is 5. And so when we were doing this prior to this, she was like 1 or 2. And I was really struggling with the old dog's quality of life, my daughter's quality of life, and my quality of life, and managing incontinent dogs. I'm not talking about the old part, but just the incontinent part, and being able with that amount, right? If you have just 1, it's different from when you're taking on 4 or 5 at a time. And so we realized that we needed a home that had a separate space where we could create it, still be a part of our home, but have a place where we could literally line the floors with urine pads, and the dogs could have as many accidents as they want and also be free fed and all of that, and have their own separate entrance that could be a ramp with no stairs. And so that's what the sanctuary is. It is literally on our property. It's the garage, but it's not a garage. It's a beautiful, little cabin. It's 1 level living. We have ramps that go in and ramps that go out. It's a living room with a television, and it's a nice big open space. And so we're in there pretty much 6, 7, 8 times a day. I mean, it's just part of our life. We're in there. We're caring for them the same way we're caring for our own animals, because we consider them ours. We don't adopt out, because the dogs that we take generally have a average lifespan of about 6 months. And the goal for me is never to put that animal through any more transition than they've already been through. We do have some that are longer residents. We have, Fletch has been with us for a year. He's our longest resident at this time, and hopefully he'll get it a little bit longer. But our goal is not to try to find more placement for them. We want to be the safe place, the soft landing for them to be here, if that makes sense. So the day-to-day care is the same as it would be if it was a dog that I've had from a puppy. We're not a shelter or a facility in that regard. We do have a very small group of extremely dedicated volunteers that come and spend time with them, but we're not we're a private residence that's doing this.
Well, that sounds terrific.
Didn't you recently have a lab who ended up going blind that was a younger dog who had to have a nucleation done, but you found was healthy and active enough that I thought you found him a home?
So that was through one of the shelters that I worked with. So I work very closely with lots of local and national shelters. If they have a special needs dog that they do not have the capacity to fund the care or specific disability or testing or anything like that, old dogs will still pay for, facilitate, and foster that dog. And then that organization will adopt that dog out. So Stevie that came to me, we fostered him through Old Dogs. We paid for his double inoculation and everything that he needed. And then he was adopted out through the SPCA. We don't adopt out in that regards, if that makes sense. If we take the dog in as a transfer from the rescue, that dog is staying with us. We don't adopt them out.
Wonderful. So if someone had a heart for rescue and because this seems like an underserved group, like I get calls probably once a month from someone who has an elderly family member. They have this old, probably not super healthy dog that the rest of the family is like, he doesn't like anybody. We don't like, he's lost his person. They often pretty significant behavior problems that you couldn't easily put them in a house with children. This seems like a really served community in dogs. Do you have a way for people who have a heart for this work to either model something after what you're doing or even expand to have this going on in other places?
Yeah, I mean, there's only 50 senior dog sanctuaries in the US. There's not a lot of us that are out there doing this. The main concern that many of us that are doing this have is that a lot of people seem like, wow, it sounds like a great idea. But it is 4 or 5 times the work than your regular shelter or facility because you are dealing with the significant medical issues and the incontinence and all of that, not let alone behavioral. Although honestly, I talk a lot about senior dog behavior and stuff. It's kind of like watching whales. Like, senior dogs are so slow that even when they have issues, it's like, everybody calm down. Like it's absolutely, it's usually fine. Like,
right. Like their arguments are not
exactly
hugely dangerous because they have
right.
6 teeth.
Right. But the reality is that, people can get in over their heads very, very quickly cost wise because you're not financially making anything in terms of adopting out. When I do fundraisers or if I do fundraisers, I don't bring old dogs. I don't, like a lot of these places will have these fundraisers. Oh, let's bring some dogs for people. I don't do that with my old dogs. I'm not doing that to them. So it can be a very lonely, isolated way of doing this. So it's important that my recommendation, anybody who's interested in doing this, seek other sanctuaries out and talk to them. But quite frankly, what we don't need sanctuaries. We need to actually be promoting people, like individuals and families, to be looking into helping and doing this themselves. We need to be promoting people to look into bringing in senior dogs or hospice dogs or special needs dogs for adoption and taking them in. And that's really where we're going to need less sanctuaries and we're going to see more of this need met.
So I have started making kind of a consistent effort with even puppy people. So, our audience here knows I had a breast cancer experience that was fascinating earlier in the year. I'm doing great. Thank you. But it, for the first time, really brought into mind for me, if something were to happen to me, like we have 4 dogs and a cat, and kind of that's a lot of care. It's a lot of expense. I'm trying to impress upon people, no matter how young we are, we really should be making plans for what would happen if something happened to us, right? A car accident can happen anytime. And while I'm still buying green bananas, I should be planning for the what ifs. I think every family should be planning for the what ifs. So, can you speak a little bit to what options there are for families? Because I'm sure as you've moved through this, you've researched like how to help your regular clients to avoid their dogs being a dog that does have, not that it's not a great place to go to, Helen, but I'm sure ideally we're all working to keep dogs from needing that umbrella to catch them.
Well, there's multiple facets that go into why dogs end up in these situations. There are absolutely the cases where people have not done the planning that's necessary and they've gotten sick, or the elderly are no longer able to care for the animal and the family can't take the dog on. A lot of cases the family can, but sometimes the family can't. They either live out of state, they don't have the facilities to do so, or the financial ability or anything like that. So having an understanding and a plan in place, just like we have a plan in place, like a will for what's going to happen to our property, what's going to happen to anything like that, is absolutely essential and helpful. However, a lot of the cases of the dogs that we get are people who did not realize or understand how much care an old dog would need as they get older, because elderly dog care and seniorhood in pets is not discussed widely enough by any professional other than your veterinarian. And it's only when they are really at that point. So the goal and something that I'm actively trying to do is promote senior dog care and hospice dog care awareness, so people aren't caught off guard by things like incontinence, diabetes, Cushing's disease, massive dental care, all of those things that can come up very, very quickly and in a short period of time. We spend a lot of time prepping people for puppy biting and mouthing and crate training and obedience classes and all of that stuff, right? So everyone's sort of aware, in the first 3 years, it's going to be a lot of work. But the last 3 years are not educated about nearly enough. So the more we're educating people on that portion, the less likely we're going to have people calling me, which is now a call I get about 5 or 6 times a day. I've got an incontinent dog. It's ruining my floors. I can't do this anymore. Will you take him? And that's what we need to try to avoid.
Well, and I love that idea that we really do, especially trainers, I think, have a big responsibility to help families understand, like, yes, you have the cute little puppy, but by the time they're 20, the amount of work you'll be doing is spectacularly different than the work you're doing on even that front end with a young puppy. Just having vestibular disease hit out of nowhere and send a dog and a family into, crazy town. It happens very quickly, and it brings a tremendous amount of stress to the home sometimes as a dog is aging and deteriorating. So I personally, like, if you decide to come up with a program to do that education, sign me up. I will be your another voice helping with that. And I would love that work, right? Because it is really a rich blessing. Well, for me, as my dogs have aged, I mean, I've had dogs that were in a drop-through crate, just like they were when they were itty-bitty puppies. So if they had to eliminate, they could, and they weren't in filth. And when we were home, they were managed in a way that they weren't destroying our house, but we could richly love them. And I've kind of found my way through to that because I've had so many dogs. But for the average family, they have no idea what's coming, and they just get overwhelmed, both by the cost and by the amount of stress and work it is.
Right. And that's my workshop called Savoring the Sunset. So I have a workshop that I do specifically on senior dog care and proactive care, not just physically, but behaviorally as well. Understanding proactive behavioral management for senior dogs, and understanding, the high amount of anxiety that dogs will go through when their function and purpose suddenly drops down. They're no longer able to do that. Things like considering one level living and all of that. So we do have a course called Savoring the Sunset, which is sort of a precursor to the Good Death course that we teach.
I was going to say, one of the things that we have done on Your Family Dog, and I've done with my clients, is Dr. Alicia Karras from Tufts came on, and she talked about giving the older dog a better life. And one of the things she also talked about was having, and we'll link to this in the show notes because I think it dovetails quite nicely with this. She has a checklist for older dogs that you can go through on it and just check off, how are we doing today on elimination? How are we doing on eating? How are we doing on, pain? Are we walking okay? So you can just check it off on a daily basis. So you can actually see how your dog is doing over a period of time, which helps you to better manage them, as well as gives you information that you can work with your vet. I think it's really important to begin to understand that, our dogs start to deteriorate, and we need to keep that in mind. We need to think about, arthritis supplements earlier than what most people do. And I think we need to think about pain management earlier than most people do, because I think dogs hide pain a lot. And I think you can begin to see that if you're willing to sort of just do this checklist on a regular basis.
So that's exactly what we have. We have a checklist. I categorize all of my hospice dogs into three things, which is function, purpose, and joy. I look at those three things every single day with each hospice dog. And that's what I teach clients about when we talk about quality of life versus quality of death, because that's something that is not discussed and talked about enough. And what people have to understand is that quality of life and quality of death often overlap. As you're getting into the lower levels of the quality of life, you're in the high levels of quality of death, and understanding what the stages of death and the death process looks like, both physically and mentally, and how you measure that function, purpose, and joy for clients, and that checklist. We often look at quality of life in terms of physical function. How is the dog walking? Is the dog eating? And I really, really focus very much in my work with my hospice dogs on purpose and joy, because the function portion is only part of it. And that, unfortunately, is very honed in on. But purpose and joy in our animals, just like it is with us, is a huge part of feeling alive. Whether or not we're breathing or not, or eating or not, does not say that I've had a good day.
Right. And I think that's a terrific way to take a look at it. I was thinking when our old dog Rubble got myelin degeneration on his back, and he wasn't in pain, and our daughter was in college, and it was kind of her dog. So we put him on prednisone, but he was really happy. I mean, like when she got home, we were putting up the Christmas tree, and, we just put a blanket down for him to lay down in, gave him some popcorn, and he, ate his popcorn while we were putting up the Christmas tree. And my husband would put him in the wagon to take him for a walk around the neighborhood so he could get all the sniffs and stuff. So as he was deteriorating physically, he wasn't quite deteriorating mentally or emotionally yet. And when that started to go, then we did make the decision to euthanize him. But I think there are ways, if you're willing to be creative and take a look at, not just form and function, but emotional form and function as well. And so I love the idea that you also consider the joy, because Rebel had a couple of really good last few weeks, riding around in the wagon.
And we lost our pug last year really young to some oral cancer, right? So oral cancers generally are awful and progress really quickly. And I think it was the first time that I got the timing right for a euthanasia, right? It wasn't too early and it wasn't too late. So I told my staff, when my time comes, which, maybe that jumped the gun a little bit, that, let me die with chocolate frosting on my lips. Like, that's a good way to go, right? So he still knew this was forbidden fruit that he was getting. He still knew who the people around him were. He was still happy, but we were right on the edge of choosing, like, can he eat or can he breathe? Because the oral cancer was in his upper palate. Or it was in his palate. So it was starting to infringe on his ability to breathe, right? We're not going to do surgery. That's not going to work. So it was, we need to do this. And I think up until then, I've always done it too late. Where, to be fair, if I've done it well, the only way I'm ready for them to go is if I go first. So I think it's changed my perspective on that quality of life. So would you say that your decision making about old age euthanasia with dogs, do you think your view on that has changed through this experience?
Yes and no. I mean, every single hospice dog we've lost 3 dogs in the last 5 days. So we say goodbye to dogs probably about 4 or 5 times average every 2 weeks. We are constantly making these decisions, and there is not one that is the same as the other. Maybe they have the same disease. Whether we're dealing with renal failure or heart failure or diabetes in conjunction with arthritis or, fused spines or cancer, whatever it is. But every single one has taught me something different about what I'm looking at and what I need to look for. And so it made me an incredibly sharp eye for what I'm looking at versus what I would say when I was originally starting, even like 6 years ago, when I first was doing this one dog at a time. It was not nearly as sharp. And that being said, one of the most important things is having, when you're doing something like this, my husband, because even though I try to be extremely sharp and he does too, we are incredibly emotionally invested. You can't do this work and not be emotionally invested. So it's sometimes very important that Jake will say to me, Helen, it's time. And I will say, and he'll go, no, it's time. And I'll do the same for him. And you need those kind of the 2 or 3 people that are rationally, emotionally invested, which is a very difficult line to walk. And that's something that I've started really coaching clients on. And that's where that checklist of the function, purpose, and joy, like you were saying, Julie, the reason that physical piece of paper helps is because it's keeping you in check. It's keeping you watching and making sure that you're taking care of that stuff. And that's very, very difficult to initially do because death in general is not talked about in a good way in our society and in our culture. Death is scary. Death is final. Death is, we want to avoid it at all costs because we don't know what happens afterwards. So when we don't understand or know something, we want to avoid it at all costs. Now that I've become so familiar with it and I'm so understanding of what it is and that it's not the worst thing, death is not the worst thing for animals or for people, I look at things a little bit differently. But to say that they're all different, Tina. Every single one, like we lost Axel yesterday, and Axel was for a totally different scenario than Jameson on Friday, and then Elliot was on Thursday. It is constantly teaching me something different about each one.
You have one strong heart. I can't imagine that doesn't take a toll on you as well. I think that if you are a caring person at all, this kind of thing can really take a toll. So you have an incredibly large and generous heart to do this.
It's something that I have learned. I've had to learn how to balance it. So I have, one thing that was huge for me, Julie, in this work was when we bought this house and I was able to have the sanctuary not be in my living room. That made a huge difference for my quality of life, not just for the cleanup, but also for the ability to take a break and come back to my living room with my own, I hate to say my own dogs because these are all my dogs, but like my younger dogs, my healthy dogs, my animals that I wasn't worried about. I mean, anything can happen all the time, but I wasn't watching them actively decline, if that makes sense. And yes, it takes its toll significantly, sometimes more so than I let on. But I found a balance in having our farm here, in keeping my chickens, my pigs, my goats, having our horses, and having I have a lot of personal dogs in terms of we have 13 dogs of my own. And those dogs, people are like, you have so many dogs. Well, yeah, but I also say goodbye to about 4 or 5 dogs every 2 weeks. So whatever keeps me able to continue doing this work, you can't knock it until you're also doing that other side of it. So, I'm finding my way through this slowly but surely, but it is a very heavy weight to carry. And that's, again, circling back to what Tina was saying, people wanting to do this work, they have to be very careful in how they are going to find their ways of coping with that grief. Because if you don't have that system in place, and if you aren't self-aware enough to understand what you're going to be going through on a very almost sometimes daily basis with also anticipatory grief, you may find coping mechanisms that aren't the healthiest, or you end up holding on to the animal longer than you should. And that's where things can get really muddy and complicated.
So you have young children who are hysterical and fantastic and lovely. And so I was telling Julie, it's a guilty pleasure to check in on the St. Pierre family and see what antics they're up to this week. Jake, as well as the girls. So a question I have for you with regard to this grief is, how do you think it's impacting the kiddos?
That's a great question. And it's a question that I'm always really thrilled to answer because the kickback that I get whenever I suggest to people, oh, we want to get our first dog for our kids. I'm like, look for a senior dog. Now, I'm not talking about a hospice dog, but look for a senior dog, 8, 9 years old. And the kickback that I get is, oh, well, then they'll lose them so soon. And I don't think I could do that to my kids. And it makes me like itchy when I hear it, because senior dogs and senior dog and hospice dog care has been one of the greatest things I could have ever done for my children. Hands down. Okay. Hands down. It has taught them about compassion. It's taught them selflessness. It's taught them about grief and emotion in a way that not many other experiences can. You know, what we have to understand again about death and grief is there's going to be death in our lives no matter what, whether we're dealing with death of relationships, whether we're grieving the loss of a job, whether we're moving somewhere or a relation, you know, anything like this. Death and grief is going to be a part of your life, and coping and learning how to cope with that anticipatory grief, in the moment grief, after the aftermath grief is lessons that not a lot of kids get today, because again, it's like, don't talk about it. We want to avoid it at all costs, because it's sad, you know? And the kids have become so well-rounded because of it. And that's also a huge part also due to the life that we have as well. Like, we have a very happy life in terms of, like, yes, there's death. We say goodbye to a lot of animals, but we also have our eggs that our chickens hatch for us, and we're feeding baby goats that we're bringing up. And like, there's just the circle of life understanding that we have here. But even before the farm, we were doing this. You know, my daughters have grown up with a dying dog in the living room. Okay. And understanding that life is precious. We need to not take it for granted. We need to find joy in those moments when we see the old dog have a really yummy dinner and start rolling around on the kitchen floor and is having fun, like appreciating those moments rather than always looking for how can we avoid talking about that stuff. So it's really not something. I honestly find that when that is used, when the children's grief is used as an excuse to not go down the road of adopting seniors, it's the adult human that is worried about that more than the kids are.
Well, and even with humans, we've completely insulated ourselves. Now, it is interesting. So here locally, I'm seeing a big push to bring humans into our homes and live with them and hospice them and palliative care them in your home. I mean, one, just partially because of the expense, but right. Two, you can bring extra care in to alleviate stress on a family and still provide phenomenal care. So it makes me think, like, it's so fascinating that culturally we're kind of going back to grandma aging out in our living room and families starting to experience, yes, the ugliness, because there is an ugly side to the death and dying process, but also the beauty of that, and not to miss the opportunities to say, how did you and grandma and grandpa meet? Or to say to a senior dog, do you prefer a little bit of sweet potato or a little bit of pumpkin? And having that dog go, wait, there's an option? Can I have both, please? Like,
we're doing bucket lists.
Right. We're doing bucket lists with the dogs.
Yeah.
The same way we do bucket lists with the people. And that's such a beautiful thing. Like, he's not a hospice dog, but I was given a senior dog 2 years ago. He's significantly shortened my list of things that my dogs have never done. He's taught me a lot. Christopher jokes that he has a DNR, but he also is a phenomenal joy. Like, he's hysterical and naughty. And I love that about him. And we would have missed. And this is a dog that if he had gone to the shelter, between his behavior and his voice, like, no one would have adopted that dog. And if he was adopted, he'd really be at risk for abuse. He really would, because he's occasionally incontinent. like he just has little stuff that kind of comes and goes that the average family would be like, well, he's mad at us and that's why he peed in the dining room. I'm like, no, he sometimes just gets caught short the same way at 53. I sometimes get caught a little short and have to run. And so it gave me a different perspective. It does break my heart. Like I have to tell you, like every single time you post about a dog that has transitioned to the next phase of peace and rest and joy, I am like, it's like I'm watching Old Yeller. Like I'm just sitting, reading, hearing your voice in my head, carrying your grief in my heart, and boohooing like a big old baby for every one of these dogs, because I love that you fall in love with every single one of them. And so do we on the other side of the screen. So I want you to know, like, it does have that impact. I'm way down in Georgia and I was in love with Loretta.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
all of them, like you find each one's awesome. And I love that.
Well, what I was going to say is that I love the idea of children being able to participate in the reality of the world. In literature, like in Old Yeller may be a piece of fiction, but I remember it was the first first fiction. I read it when I was in the 4th grade, that I understood the power of literature, that I understood how deeply you can connect to it and how much it can make a difference in your life. Because I remember, I'll never forget where I was sitting when I read the scene where Old Yeller dies and thinking to myself, wow. And I know that this dog isn't real, but it feels real. And I think that if we let our kids be the fullness of who they are, then we're actually doing them a real favor. And, C.S. Lewis talks about that we shouldn't shy away. I mean, not gratuitous, violence but
right.
The reality of the situation, the reality. And so that when you experience it and then you read about it and, these things become part and parcel of who you are. And as you said, it's the perfect breeding ground for empathy and
resiliency.
compassion.
I mean,
Yeah,
resiliency
absolutely.
because the kids are able to process that grief. They will talk about it. They will discuss it. And then we move to the next phase of whatever grief or, discussion that we're having, or, and that could be laughing in terms of remembering something, but that resiliency is key for kids today. And I don't honestly see it being discussed or talked about enough. We pad it here. Now, that's not the case in other cultures. In this, it's mainly honestly in the US culture. If you look at other cultures around the world, when the way that they deal with death or discuss death is very often celebrated. But, we very much are a culture of, if I don't understand it, then it's very scary, and then it needs to be sort of avoided. And what I said to a client very recently who was looking for another dog is, she said, well, if the puppy, then I'm not worried about how long we'll have. And I said, with all due respect, you could get a puppy that could get osteosarcoma and pass in 2 years, right? So if you get a puppy and build your kids up to thinking that dog is, going to be around for the next 10 to 15 years, you're already programming those kids to potentially have severe disappointment. That dog could get hit by a car, it could get osteosarcoma. Anything could happen to any of us at all times. So cherishing the last piece of life and being grateful, like we have so we sometimes a lot of times we bring some of the oldies into our home. And so we have Myrna. Myrna's the house oldie. She's 17 years old. She has no jaw. She pees everywhere. And so we cherish old Myrna because she's made it 17 years. And so when she pees on the floor, my 5-year-old's like, Myrna had another accident. I'll get a paper towel, and it's just sort of like part of life, and they're expecting it, it's, and so it was really funny. My last little comment before I know you want another question, but my brother came over with his 2 kids from Spain, and they have no animals in the house. Okay. So imagine coming to my house, which is just like, welcome to Dr. Dolittle, like the Ark. And, my 5-year-old niece walks over and she's like looking at this tiny curled up, no jaw dog, laying on the bed like this. And Eve goes, "That's Myrna. She has no jaw and she'll pee." And just walked off. Like, it was just like, this is just what is in my environment. And kids, it's just like, it was so cool to see that from my kid, like, there she is, of just appreciating that this is what lives in our house.
One of the things I was thinking when you were talking is what it also teaches is the beauty of imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've been thinking a lot lately about how there's just this drive to be perfect, to be supernatural, to be more than what you are. And there's a certain, I think, beauty in imperfection. And to embrace that and to welcome it and to say, you are perfect in your imperfection and you're beautiful in your imperfection is just a tremendous gift to give to your kids.
Yeah, no eyes. We have dogs that have no eyes. We have dogs that can't hear. We have horses. We have a horse who has blind in one eye and has, completely deaf, and he's got scabs all down his head because he bumps into things. So we've put pool noodles all around the barn and all that stuff, and making those concessions for those animals that are a little bit what we would call broken or disabled, and appreciating them and finding fun and joy in them and making them part of life is huge for the kids. I completely agree with you, Julie.
Do they make halos for dogs or for horses the way
you
they
don't
do
want
for dogs?
halos. Halos are actually something that we, once you know more about blind dogs and you've lived with lots of blind animals or anything like that, it's actually worse to use halos than it is to let the animal bump into things.
I've only used them for short periods of time as the dog, like with SARS, where that first couple of weeks or days when it's really dangerous, because it is, I love that UGA loans them out. Like, here, use them, and when you're done with them, bring them back, and the next dog will use them. We found it hugely helpful when the pug went blind because it allowed him to toddle around on his own, and I wasn't as worried that he was going to hurt himself as he was getting used to being blind. Once he was fully blind, then like within, I think probably 3 days, we stopped using it because then it was cumbersome.
Unfortunately, a lot of people want to keep them on the animal all the time, and that's actually not what you want to be doing. You want the animal to bump into stuff sometimes. Like, it's hard to watch, but it's also literally part of the learning process for the animal to be able to learn about their environment.
Well, in order for them to create that internal map. The one thing when I talk to my clients is like, okay, your dog's going blind. This is not the end of the world for you or for them. And, but just stop moving furniture around. Your dog needs to have a map, and they will create the map of their environment. But but we can't keep having construction on the roads. You have to leave things as is.
Well, and also like navigating how to keep them safe. Right. Because that is a little bit of a learning curve. And you're right. It's awful to watch when they bump into things. It amazes me how within like 3 days, a dog figures out, like, don't run in a straight line because that ends badly. Right.
Yeah,
like, they do that Mako shark move where they hit everything at an angle. And you're like, excellent. You're starting to figure it out. Like, slow down a little bit, bud, and use your ears so that you can hear how close you are to the wall. I love it. So, I mean, honestly, Helen, there's so much about this that is beautiful and rich and sad, all of it. Do you find that as you tell these stories, it's building empathy for other people who are maybe not neurotypical or have disabilities? Like, I would think that this speaks to even the human world of we're not all the same. We all have strengths and sensitivities and things that we're good at and we can't do anymore. This, I imagine, would build a lot of empathy for even the person who says this elderly dog is more than my family can navigate today. Because I think we all sometimes get a little bit of a hard heart about that. And I think sometimes that's just not fair. That families are dealing with a ton of stuff. And at best, we know like 3% of it. And it's awfully easy to judge. I would much prefer a family to say, we can't do this. And then for an animal to languish or be abused. just
So
because
I agree.
somebody can't do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we have a learning center for kids that have in all kinds of disorders that come to volunteer with the old dogs and the old animals. And it's really beneficial to them. I've got a lot of feedback that kids coming to the sanctuary with the older disabled dogs can sometimes be a lot more effective than going to just your regular animal shelter. You're not just dealing with homeless, you're dealing with all these other disabilities, and that really pushes on that empathy and understanding that this goes across our species. I think, to speak to what you're saying in terms of understanding that some people, like you said, the families that can't, there are two schools of thought on that I have. One is absolutely yes, then, and that's why we exist, to take those animals on, but also people also then need to be okay and comfortable with also maybe saying goodbye to that animal themselves, rather than putting the animal through a very stressful transition. If it's whether it's to our sanctuary or any sanctuary, or rehoming that animal because they don't have the capability. And that is a very difficult thing for humans to wrap their head around, because sometimes it will feel like it's earlier than they potentially want it to be. But when you think about quality of life and the transition that animal is going to go through, potentially, if they then have to rehome them, that's a conversation that I have with a lot of people that want to surrender and put the dog in my sanctuary, thinking that they're doing the right thing, when actually the right thing to do would be to say goodbye to that animal prior to putting it through my sanctuary, because that is going to be a lot more for that animal to take on. We're not dealing with a 3-year-old dog here that has hopefully 10 years left. We're dealing with a 14, 15-year-old dog that's been with one person its whole life, and now it's going to be completely upended. So that's a difficult conversation, and it can go either way.
Right. And it has to do with who's going to be on this side of the veil, loving them through it. Should it be someone who's known them their whole lives and adored them and knows all of their secrets and their quirks? Or you're right, is it someone like you who has fallen in love with an old dog? But I often, I adopted Victoria as a teenager. I didn't get to see her first steps. I didn't get to see her learn how to ride a bike, right? There were pieces that I missed. And I often think those things in terms of like Mr., who I got as a 10-year-old dog. And I mean, I know a lot of his quirks now, but I didn't get to see all of and fall in love with the young puppy dog who was naughty and silly. Now I have the old, silly, naughty dog. So yes, I imagine that can be a difficult conversation to navigate. But I love that either way, those animals have someone who loves them at that important transition time. That's how it should be. It does shock me how often you have dogs that in the morning were great, and by the end of the day, I'm reading that you had to let them go because there was just a massive, fast change.
Yep. And that happens very, very much more with dogs that are surrendered at a late age in life. People do not understand we sort of understand, but how much stress can impact physical health. So when you have a dog, they cannot rebound from that kind of stress the way that they can when they're younger. And the expression of dying of a broken heart is something that we see a lot of the time here. And those are the ones that weigh the hardest on me. I don't have as much of a hard time with dogs that I get from shelters or rescues that I pull in from serious neglect or abuse. But when I get dogs in that have been with a person for 14, 15, 16 years, and that person is no longer there, or the family can't care for them, or that person just doesn't want to deal with the dog anymore, and those dogs get here and go, what did I do? I don't know what I did. Those are the ones that are the hardest, because that weighs a much harder toll on me emotionally long term.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion, and I'm so glad that you came on to join us. I kind of feel like we could basically have you on every week, Helen, and there would be something new to talk about. This has been terrific. I had a novel released that I wrote called The Beast Keepers. And there's one chapter where the vet gets his dog, and he finds out the origin story of the dog. And what you just said, I think if you read that, you'll have a deep appreciation for this dog's origin story. So I don't want to say any more because I don't want to give it away. But anyway, I think you'll really enjoy it. I was trying to think. We covered so many things, and we talked about some really tough topics, but in a very positive way. And I was just wondering if there's anything in particular that you would like to say, make to our listeners that we perhaps haven't covered.
I think my biggest thing is that people will ask me all the time, like, how do you do it? How do you do it? And it's like, because I have to. And I would love, and I know it's never going to happen that way, but I would love that the burden would be less on many of us that are doing this work if we were promoting and really embracing and advocating for senior and hospice care as a community for our animals. That doesn't mean that you have to give up your whole house and it has to be covered in pee and poop. You can have one separate space that you dedicate to taking in an old dog and giving them that help. You would be amazed at how many shelters, rescues, and places will help you help you with the financial medical care if you are willing to open and have that space for that animal for 6 months to a year. You just have to be willing to take the heartache part of it. But the heartache is outweighed so much by the experience, and people need to realize that, and you won't realize that until you've tried it and you've done it. So that is my biggest takeaway for people is please consider this. Please think about going into your local shelter or rescue and saying, give me the oldest, sickest, stinkiest dog you have. That's what I want to help, and go through that process. And if you do it once and you don't want to do it again, that's fine. But I can guarantee you'll want to do it again. You may need a break between it, but you'll want to do it again. And that's what people need to take away from the work that I'm doing is I'm doing this because there's really no other place for these dogs. And I really would love it if more people wanted to do it. You don't have to have a sanctuary. You don't have to have 16 of them. I promise that's not the way you want to go. But if you do one at a time, it will change your life in so many ways for the good.
So recently, Old Dogs Go to Helen had a really awful situation. Someone basically stole the identity of the organization, and all of your funds, all of your donations were stolen. It made me like I was in a rage, trying to figure out like how the heck can we help? And that was part of how I came up with the idea of inviting you on to the podcast so we can try to help. So are you willing to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we had a scam that we were the victims of, these very sophisticated scams that are actually happening all over. They're talking about it on Good Morning America now. It's all over national news. We were the victims of someone that was able to gain access to our Bank of America Old Dogs account and was able to take close to $10,000, which we have. Every nonprofit, one of the biggest things that we learned was that you want to have 1 month's worth of your expenses, your basic expenses, sort of set aside just in case, right? If 1 month I got no donations, I want to make sure that I have everything set aside just in case. And that averages around $10,000 a month is what we spend in supplies and medical care and vaccines. Not vaccines, everything that goes along with taking care of these dogs, not including emergency surgeries or anything like that. But so that was taken. And it was awful. It was like one of the worst, like stomach dropping moments for me. But we're doing okay. We were able to, rally the troops. We got a lot of support locally from our community. WMUR did a story on it. But one of the reasons I talked about it was because, thank God we are a nonprofit and we were able to say, look, this just happened. But this is happening to like all kinds of like elderly, honestly, that don't know. And then they don't have social media to go out and say, I just lost $10,000. Can someone help recoup the funds? So we have been actively talking about it. But yes, donations towards our help sort of get that back up to where it needs to be. So we are okay just in case.
So
and where would we do those donations?
Right through the website.
Okay.
Olddogsgotohelen.com has a donation page where you can donate right through either just our PayPal or our PayPal Giving Fund. You can also just go on Bonfire and buy an Old Dogs Go to Helen sweatshirt, and part of that purchase goes towards Old Dogs. So if you want to do it via, that, and then we also have an Amazon wish list. If you want to send a bag of food or some paper plates or a can of pumpkin puree to the oldies, you can do anything like that. But I do say to people a lot, financial contributions to old or senior sanctuaries is where we need it the most, because you can send us paper plate, but we need medicine. Medicine is what we spend the majority of our funding on, medicine and vet care.
So how else can we love you?
That's it. Just like Old Dogs Go to Helen on Facebook, and watch the stories of these little oldies.
Yeah.
And they're great.
So cute, and they're so funny.
Yeah.
Like how plucky little old ladies and little old men they are, right? That they're just like, I love when you're like, we are obviously doing it wrong. Like Mildred thinks we should be doing this an entirely separate way. I personally would love your recommendations on like what are the best what are the best washable rugs? What are the best slip covers that protect your fur? Like these are all things that as our dogs age, we all need to know. And you are, if nothing else, an excellent R&D facility.
Yeah. So we, when you're on the Old Dogs page on Facebook, you'll see my Good Death course that I'm teaching next month. It's a 3-week course, and it's a course where I talk about that exact thing: function, purpose, and joy, how you measure that. I also will post there my Savoring the Sunset course on helping seniors, where I cover all kinds of equipment, what I recommend, what doesn't work, and all of that stuff, especially even talking about like dogs with disabilities, halos, wheelchairs, what works, what doesn't work, when I found things that do well, and then other things that I've learned in the past now has just been like, you really don't need that stuff. It's like when you have a baby, your first baby, and your house is filled with stuff, and by the time you have your 4th baby, you've got them in a drawer in the dresser next to you, just because you're like, whatever, as long as you're comfortable and you're quiet, that's fine with me. So yes, if you like that, you'll see all of those resources, Tina, of all of that stuff.
Great. So are you looking for other instructors? Because our podcast has a lot of families, a lot of veterinarians, as well as dog trainers. Like we're all in it together, grandparents. So are you looking for instructors for these programs for other areas?
At this point, no. I really want to start, though, having guests. Like I'd love to do a senior dog, like a monthly live chat.
I love that idea.
Where I bring in like chiropractors and all of that stuff. I honestly, right now, I have to learn to delegate that stuff, because so much of my time is caring for the dogs. And it's a fine balance for me, as I don't want to lose sight and stop doing that in order to be doing. So yes, that's all coming, Tina. It's just finding the ways to delegate what and where, so that I can do that, but also not lose my time with the dogs, because that feeds me to then do this stuff.
And what ages do you tell people to start like attending? Like if I was going to promote this with our local vet population, at what age would you target the pet to be to start looking at those? Like,
I think you should,
because a Doberman 8 is 1,000 years old, and a Vizsla 8 is starting to calm down a little bit.
I mean, I have veterinarians, trainers, I have groomers, I have people, the public taking the Good Death course that don't have seniors yet, but just or Savoring the Sunset, to just want to expand their understanding of end of life care. And how to have those conversations, right? How to have conversations with kids about death. How can we have veterinarians talk about the end of life conversations with clients? Because one thing that's very difficult in the veterinary community today is learning, when do we promote extending life, and when do we start having the conversation about ending life without upsetting the client, right? Like that's a very difficult road to walk, and vets are unfortunately so stretched thin. They've got 20 minutes. They are oftentimes sort of like balancing a whole array of things. And so this course is designed for anybody that wants to just, whether you've just got a new puppy and you want to learn what this is, or you're dealing with an elderly animal, it doesn't matter. It's designed for across the board.
We just, Sid Happens just started an adolescent puppy course because I realized we were like doing puppy and then we were like, you're doing great. Off you go. And then they were coming back like 4 months later, pulling their hair out because we were goofballs and didn't prepare them for adolescence. And so, yes, I have this big piece of me that's like, I need to be providing like this, savoring the sunset and preparing. Like we talk to people all day long about all the things you need before you bring your puppy home. But you're right. We don't talk to them about what they'll need as their dog is aging to prepare for that.
Right.
I love that you're doing this work and I love you so much. And I hope you feel our love from all corners of the world as you and we all fall in love with these oldie goldies and their silly and hystericalness.
That has helped a lot. You know, the blessing, their social media has a lot of curses to it, but the blessing behind it has been the community support, because again, it's a very lonely life unless I use social media to gain that sort of reinforcement for us that even though, you know, every time we get a donation in, like even if it's as simple as like $10 or $20, we know that there are a lot of people that can't do this work, but when they send that, or they don't have to send monetary, but they're like, thank you so much, or anything, that feeds Jake and I. We're like, there are people out there that see the work that we're doing and the poop that we're scooping and the goodbyes that we're saying, and it's helping keep us afloat. So I really appreciate that.
Well, and I will say you had one senior that you like created a mannequin version of you.
Oh yeah. Felon. But we call him Felon because
Felon.
It was fake Helen.
Fake Helen.
Fake
no,
Helen,
but that was brilliant. And I actually used that like the next week. Somebody called me with an old cat who, if it wasn't on somebody's lap, was losing its marbles. And so we got like the pressure activated heating pad, put it on the Felon for that woman, and game changer. Woman could do life with her kids and cat was happy and content. This is like, this cat's 22 years old. Like she's like a rickety old house, but she's healthy and she's happy. She just wants to be on a lap. So there is a Georgia version of a Felon who is for cats. So like, I love all these, like there's such fantastic ideas and a rich, like it's an honor to call you my friend.
Oh,
and
thanks, Tina.
This is going to sound patronizing. It's not intended that way. I'm so proud of you. Like what a beautiful gift you are to the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. It really does.
Yes. Well, Helen, I have really enjoyed getting to know you in this brief moment, and I really hope that you will come back to your family dog and we can continue this discussion. So
I'd love to talk about senior dogs and young dogs. If you ever want to talk about senior people bringing in puppies when they have a senior dog at home, let's talk about that. I get that question.
That would be a great topic. I would love to have that one because I do get that one. Oh, wait, well, he seemed so lonely when his friend died, so we thought we'd get him a puppy. Okay.
And the old dog's like, please take it back. Please take it back.
Yes, that could be a fascinating transition.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Well, yeah, we'll send you the booking link. We'll send you the booking link again, and you could just book 3 months out. Just keep booking and come on. Because seriously, these are conversations that I think you're right. Like trainers have to be a certain amount of long in the tooth to pick their heads up long enough to go, wait, there's this whole thing that we're missing. Right. So yeah, come back and
please do. Please do. We would really love to have you back.
Give lots of money, people. Give lots of money. Help these sweet old dogs out.
And we will make sure that the link to that is on the website, as well as the one to it. Did you say it was Bonfire where you can get the sweatshirt?
Yeah, well, if you go to Old Dogs Go to Helen and you go to donate, you'll see all of those links
great.
already provided, Julie.
Great. Well, we will make sure that those are all put on the website. So Thank you so much for joining us. All right. We'll see you all next time on Your Family Dog.
Thanks for listening to Your Family Dog. Got questions? Interesting ideas? Visit www.yourfamilydogpodcast.com to share your thoughts.